risky video today. Will you stay here to comfort me? Thank you. I used to think that being called strong was the highest compliment I could ever receive. I used to take pride in being a strong person who doesn't give up and who toughs it out in difficult situations. And now I see that strength as one of my most toxic traits. Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about situations where you're working really hard, but it's because it's towards something that's really important to you, whether that's becoming a doctor, building a business, building a healthy lifestyle, finding your ideal partner, and then building a healthy relationship with them. There's absolutely no way that you're going to be having fun the whole way to achieving any of those things. And there is a level of strength and perseverance and determination that's needed if you want to push through hard times so that you can ultimately achieve that thing. And in these situations, being a strong, determined person is a huge asset and it can make you really successful. But when this stay strong, don't give up, just stick it out attitude can become problematic is when you kind of make it your identity. Something that I am guilty of doing. I relied on my identity as a strong person who handles tough situations really well to get me through my entire undergrad degree. I studied physiology, and if any of you watching also study hard science in university, you will understand how grueling it is. I don't think I've worked harder at anything in my entire life, and it's embarrassing for me to admit that even though I was putting in every ounce of effort possible into my classes, I did not even enjoy them or care about anything that I was learning. And I knew that I did not want to have a career in science. The only reason why I completed that degree to the end was because I had it in my mind that I am a strong person, I can get through this, I am not a quitter. Quitting was not even an option for me because quitting was a sign of weakness. I also coped with my entire job as a hospital social worker with this stay strong and tough it out mindset. I can't even begin to describe to you how stressed I was the first few months of that job. Like, there were so many days where I would just go home crying. But how I coped and got through those first few months was by telling myself that just to tolerate it and tough it out the first few months and then it'll get better. It did get better and it did get easier as I got better at the job, but where having this stay strong, just tolerate it mindset became problematic was when it took me past the point where I already knew that this job was not something that I wanted to be doing and was not worth the stress that it was causing me. I have also approached relationships with this identity of I am a strong person, I can get through this. When a relationship would go through a hard time, I would tell myself, I'll just deal with it, I'll just tough it out, and I'll see how it goes. Even when the relationship was not a good one to begin with, and I already had a gut feeling that this person and this relationship was not right for me. And now I'm also thinking how awful that I had to force myself to adopt this mindset towards a relationship. Like, if it were the right relationship, I wouldn't have to do that. Now, because all these things are in the past now, I can look back on them and be like, why? Like, what was I thinking? Was I okay? But in the moment, can you imagine that I was thinking,
I'm so proud of myself for staying strong and sticking through this.
Girl, noticing this pattern in my own life made it very clear that having this identity as someone who stays strong and who doesn't quit and who sticks it out at all costs was not working for me anymore. It was causing me to stay in situations past their expiry date, and as a result, causing me a lot of unnecessary emotional suffering. And it was just not a healthy way to live life. And it was very clear that if I wanted better for myself, I needed to make a change. I needed to unlearn this identity as someone who can tough it out in painful situations and instead teach myself that I don't need to deal with this. I don't need to tolerate mistreatment or someone's unacceptable behavior or stay if I'm simply not having a good time. Like, I don't need to stay and try to fix every job or relationship or anything else, because some things just aren't worth fixing or are unfixable. And I'd probably be better off just letting it go and leaving instead. So I am actively in the process of teaching myself that I can just quit. I don't have to push myself to my breaking point first before I consider it acceptable to quit. I don't have to stay until I can't take it anymore. That's fucking exhausting. I can just quit without having to suffer for a long time first. And enough can be enough when I decide that it is. Now, if you've resonated with anything I've said so far, and you also take pride in your identity as someone who stays strong and endures hard times, I think it would be valuable to just take a moment and pause for a second and reflect on, where did this identity come from? Why do I feel the need to prove myself in tough situations by sticking them out? Because by identifying where this identity came from, we can then understand how this identity can lead to issues if it's taken too far. And then we can come up with ways of handling hard situations in a better, healthier way instead. So I'm going to share with you two sources of this identity and how they can both lead to potential issues. The first source is that having strength and tolerance could have been reinforced or encouraged by a parent. I know that if I were to ever go to my mom, if I was having a hard time in university or work, she would always give me the same advice, which was to 忍着, which is Chinese for to endure or tolerate. It was the same advice every single time. She'd just be like, just tough it out, honey, just get some thick skin. The issue though with having a parent reinforce or maybe even praise being a strong and tolerant person is that it can lead us to derive our self-worth from our ability to stick through tough times. And that can be dangerous if it's left unchecked, because it can lead us to stay in hard situations longer than we have to. Even the situations that aren't worth tolerating and staying strong for. We're staying because we're getting self-worth from staying there and tolerating it. Being patted on the back for being a strong, tolerant person can also lead us to seek out tough situations to be in just so that we can be in them and get self-worth from being in them. And this is likely completely unintentional and subconscious, but it happens. It's happened to me before. The second source is that some of us might have adopted this tendency to stay strong and tolerant in tough times as a survival mechanism somewhere along the way in childhood. Maybe we were going through a prolonged hard time in school or at home, and we really had no other choice at the time but to just tolerate it and get through it, because I mean, what other choices do you have as a kid when you're completely dependent on your parents for food and shelter and survival? And you know what? Having that level of strength and tolerance was probably really adaptive and served us at the time, which is why this tendency can become so internalized and conditioned in us. But when this can become a problem is if we carry that same automatic tendency to just go into battle mode when faced with a tough situation into our adulthood, even if we would be better off not fighting it and quitting instead. I find that having this understanding of where this identity came from is really helpful, because it can help us to catch ourselves in moments when we're acting from this identity and we're staying in a hard situation that we'd actually be better off leaving. And we can be like, oh, I'm doing the thing again, and this is the reason why, and then put a stop to it. So let's talk about how to actually put a stop to it. Now, with these tough situations, whether that's a job, an academic program, a business you're trying to grow, a relationship, these situations are often quite complex, and the question of whether to quit or not usually doesn't have a straightforward answer, and it can be hard to know when to stay and continue to try to put in the work to try to make it better, or to just let it go. And there is a level of acceptance that we do have to have in tough situations, because we can't just be leaving anything the second that it gets hard. So I'm going to give you 3 tools that you can use to help you make that decision of whether to stay and continue to tough it out and put in the work, or to just let it go. The first tool is to ask yourself, if my best friend was in this situation, or if I had a daughter or a son who was in the same situation, what advice would I give them? Often it's a lot easier to give advice to someone else that we care about than it is to give advice to ourselves. And often we give better advice to other people than we do to ourselves, because it's a lot easier to be objective and as a result come up with the most ideal advice when we imagine someone else being in that situation. And honestly, I would much rather trust the advice that I'd give to someone else than the advice that I'd give to myself. The second tool is something that I came across in the book Happy Sexy Millionaire by Stephen Bartlett. I'm in the middle of reading that book right now, and I'm actually learning quite a bit from it. But he has this tool in the book called the quitting framework, which is basically a flow chart that you can go through to help you decide whether or not to quit something. Finn, stop yelling! So basically, the quitting framework says that you first ask yourself, are you thinking about quitting? And if you answer yes, then you ask yourself, why are you thinking of quitting? And if your answer is it's hard, then you ask yourself, is the challenge worth the potential reward? And if your answer is yes, then you don't quit and you keep staying strong and working at it. But if your answer is no, you quit. Now, if your answer to why are you thinking about quitting is it sucks, you then ask yourself, do you think you can make it not suck? And if your answer is no, then you quit. But if your answer is yes, then you ask yourself, is the effort it would take to make it not suck worth it? And if your answer is no, then you quit. And if your answer is yes, then you don't quit and you keep sticking it out and working at it. I use this quitting framework to help me decide whether or not to quit my job as a hospital social worker. And it told me to quit, but that was not that surprising to me because I think deep down I already knew that that was the best decision. But what I found interesting by running this decision through the quitting framework was that it made me realize that there is a difference between fighting for something and forcing something. Dealing with hard situations is a fact of life, and we're all going to be faced with our fair share of hard times. But it's also important for us to realize that we don't have to see through every single hard situation that we're faced with. And it's a really important life skill to learn which hard times are worth staying strong for and fighting for, and which ones we're better off just letting go. If something is worth fighting for, chances are you're going to be willing to stay strong through the hard times. And that's when being a strong, determined person is really going to serve you. But if we're applying these same personality traits to every single hard situation that we're faced with, even the ones that aren't worth our strength and determination and that aren't even going to get us somewhere that we care to be, that's when we're trying to force something. And that's when this tendency of being a strong person who sticks it out at all costs can be problematic. But that also raises the question of how do we decide which tough situations are worth fighting for and which ones aren't? And that's where the third tool comes in, which is to do a values exercise. Some of you might have heard of a values exercise before, but basically, a values exercise helps you identify your top core values. We all have our own unique top core values, whether we're aware of them or not. And most of the time, we're not aware of them. And it's definitely worthwhile to sit down and identify what are our top values, because when we're aware of our values, we can then use them as kind of a compass to guide us in the right direction when we're faced with a big decision, such as whether to continue to tough out a hard situation or to leave it. We can compare the decision against our values and ask ourselves, is it more in line with our values to stay or or to leave. Now, I actually did create a values exercise worksheet in a Notion template that you can use to help you identify your top core values, and I'll link it below if you're interested. But I would definitely recommend doing this exercise, especially if you've resonated with anything that we've talked about in this video. It might only take you 15 to 30 minutes, but I promise you that the payoff that you're gonna get from it is gonna be exponential. And I think one of the greatest benefits of doing this exercise is that being aware of your values helps you to have a strong core. And when you have a strong core, that's when you're confident in who you are, what you stand for, and what's okay and what's not okay to you. And that's the kind of strength that I'm actually interested in having. I want to have a strong core, not a strong exterior. These are the tools that have really helped me to make better decisions and to prevent me from just blindly tolerating any tough situations before evaluating whether they are even worth me toughing them out. And it has been life-changing for me. It has reprogrammed my brain, and now I'm at a point where I'm more proud of my ability to quit situations that aren't serving me or aren't healthy for me anymore than my ability to tough out hard situations. In fact, I hope that I am never called strong or tough ever again in my whole life. Like, I think someone called me tough like a month ago or something, and I remember it didn't really do anything for me, even though it definitely would have if I had been called tough even just earlier this year. I would much rather be complimented on my ability to quit things and leave situations that aren't serving me anymore, because that's a much more useful life skill to have than the skill of handling pain well. So those are my thoughts on why it can be bad to be a strong person. I hope that this video was helpful to you in some way and that maybe it helped you to gain some insight. And if you also resonate as a strong person who handles tough situations well, I hope that you're able to give yourself some grace and realize that you don't have to keep pushing yourself to your breaking point. You can just leave. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and there's probably everything right with that. Until next time, I hope you're staying healthy and staying safe. Bye. Say bye. Bye-bye. Bye.